Linux Desktop Environments Explained. This video will cover the history of some of the most popular Linux and Unix desktop environments. We will be covering GNOME, Mate, XFCE, Cinnamon, and Lumina desktop. We will start off with Mate. Mate is named after the South American plant, yerba mate, and tea made from the herb, mate. The name is stylized in all capital letters to follow the nomenclature of other free software desktop environments like KDE and LXDE. The recursive acronym Mate Advanced Traditional Environment was subsequently adopted by most of the Mate community, again in the spirit of free software like GNU. GNU's not Unix. The use of a new name, instead of GNOME, avoids naming conflicts with GNOME 3 components. An Argentine user of Arch Linux, named Perbaro, started the Mate project to fork and continue GNOME 2 in response to the negative reception of GNOME 3, which had replaced its traditional taskbar, GNOME panel, with GNOME shell. Mate aims to maintain and continue the latest GNOME 2 codebase, frameworks, and core applications. Mate was initially announced for Debian on November 8, 2013, at its official website. Mate became an official Arch Linux community package in January 2014. Mate fully supports the GTK3 application framework. The project is supported by Ubuntu Mate lead developer Martin Wimpress and by the Linux Mint development team. We consider Mate yet another desktop, just like KDE, GNOME 3, XFCE, etc. And based on the popularity of GNOME 2 in previous releases of Linux Mint, we are dedicated to support it and to help it improve. The most popular Linux desktop was, and arguably is, GNOME 2. New features have been added to gadgets such as undo, redo, and diff viewing for file replacements. Mate 1.6 removes some deprecated libraries, moving from mateconf, a fork of GCONF, to settings, and from makeorba, a fork of GNOME's Bonobo, to dbus. One of the aims of the Mate developers is to provide a traditional user experience while using the newest technologies. In Mate 1.20, which was released in February 2018, support for high DPI was added and the GTK Plus version got increased to 3.22. The Mate 1.22 release migrated many programs from Python 2 to Python 3 and from busglib to GDBus. In an upcoming version, support for Wayland will be added. The Mate website, as of September 8, 2022, lists 27 Linux distributions and 5 Unix-like operating systems that support the Mate desktop environment. The website also provides a DistroWatch hyperlink to query distrowatch.com for all the distributions that support Mate. Now let's take a look at GNOME. GNOME, originally an acronym for GNU Network Object Model Environment, is a free and open-source desktop environment for Linux and other Unix-like operating systems. GNOME is the default desktop environment of many major Linux distributions, including Debian, Endless OS, Fedora Linux, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, SUSE Linux Enterprise, Ubuntu, and Tails. It is also the default in Oracle Solaris, a Unix operating system. GNOME is developed by the GNOME project, which is composed of both volunteers and paid contributors, the largest corporate contributor being Red Hat. It is an international project that aims to develop frameworks for software development, to program end-user applications based on these frameworks, and to coordinate efforts for internationalization, localization, and accessibility of that software. Since GNOME 2, productivity has been a key focus for GNOME. To meet this end, the GNOME Human Interface Guidelines, HIG, were created. All GNOME programs share a coherent style of graphical user interface, GUI, but are not limited to the employment of the same GUI widgets. Rather, the design of the GNOME GUI is guided by concepts described in the GNOME HIG, itself relying on insights from cognitive ergonomics. Following the HIG, developers can create high-quality, consistent, and usable GUI programs, as it addresses everything from GUI design to recommended pixel-based layout of widgets. During the GNOME 2 rewrite, many settings deemed of little value to the majority of users were removed. The guiding principle was outlined by Havoc Pennington, a software developer involved in the project, who emphasized the idea that it is better to make software behave correctly by default than to add a UI preference to get the desired behavior. GNOME aims to make and keep the desktop environment physically and cognitively ergonomic for people with disabilities. The GNOME HIG tries to take this into account as far as possible, but specific issues are solved by special software. GNOME addresses computer accessibility issues by using the Accessibility Toolkit (ATK) application programming interface, which allows enhancing user experience by using special input methods and speech synthesis and speech recognition software. Particular utilities are registered with ATK using Assistive Technology Service Provider Interface (ATSPI) and become globally used throughout the desktop. Several assistive technology providers, including Orca Screen Reader and Dasher Input Method, were developed specifically for use with GNOME. GNOME is developed by GNOME Project. GNOME development is loosely managed. Since the introduction of Discourse Forum in 2019, the discussion moved from mailing lists, and in October 2022, the project announced the plan to close its all-public mailing lists. GNOME developers and users gather at an annual GUADEC meeting to discuss the current state and the future direction of GNOME. GNOME incorporates standards and programs from freedesktop.org to better support interoperability with other desktops. GNOME is mainly written in C, XML, C++, C, HTML, Vala, Python, JavaScript, CSS, and more. A number of language bindings are available. Now let's move on to XFCE. XFCE, or XFCE, pronounced as 4 individual letters, is a free and open source desktop environment for Linux and other Unix-like operating systems. XFCE aims to be fast and lightweight while still being visually appealing and easy to use. XFCE embodies the traditional Unix philosophy of modularity and reusability. It consists of separately packaged parts that together provide all functions of the desktop environment, but can be selected in subsets to suit user needs and preference. Another priority of XFCE is adherence to standards, specifically those defined at freedesktop.org. Like GNOME, XFCE is based on the GTK toolkit, but it is not a GNOME fork. It uses the XFWM window manager, described below. Its configuration is entirely mouse-driven, with the configuration files hidden from the casual user. XFCE does not feature any desktop animations, but XFWM supports compositing. Olivier Fortin started the project in late 1996 as a Linux version of the Common Desktop Environment, CD, a Unix desktop environment that was initially proprietary and later released as free software. The first release of XFCE was in early 1997. However, over time, XFCE diverged from CDE and now stands on its own. The name XFCE was originally an initialism for Xform's Common Environment, but since that time it has been rewritten twice and no longer uses the XFORMS toolkit. The name survived, but it is no longer capitalized as XFCE, but rather as XFCE. The developer's current stance is that the initialism no longer stands for anything specific. After noting this, the FAQ on the XFCE wiki comments, "Suggestion: X freaking cool environment." The Slackware Linux distribution has nicknamed XFCE the cholesterol-free desktop environment, a loose interpretation of the initialism. Now we'll take a look at Cinnamon. Cinnamon is a free and open-source desktop environment for Linux and Unix-like operating systems, deriving from GNOME 3 but following traditional desktop metaphor conventions. The development of Cinnamon began by the Linux Mint team as a reaction to the April 2011 release of GNOME 3, in which the conventional desktop metaphor of GNOME 2 was abandoned in favor of GNOME Shell. Following several attempts to extend GNOME 3 such that it would suit the Linux Mint design goals, the Mint developers forked several GNOME 3 components to build an independent desktop environment. Separation from GNOME was completed in Cinnamon 2.0, which was released in October 2013. Applets and desklets are no longer compatible with GNOME 3. As the distinguishing factor of Linux Mint, Cinnamon has generally received favorable coverage by the press, in particular for its ease of use and gentle learning curve. With respect to its conservative design model, Cinnamon is similar to the XFCE, Marte, GNOME 2, and GNOME Flashback desktop environments. Like several other desktop environments based on GNOME, including Canonical's Unity, Cinnamon was a product of dissatisfaction with GNOME team's abandonment of a traditional desktop experience in April 2011. Until then, GNOME, that is GNOME 2, had included the traditional desktop metaphor, but in GNOME 3 this was replaced with GNOME Shell, which lacked a taskbar-like panel and other basic features of a conventional desktop. The elimination of these elementary features was unacceptable to the developers of distributions such as Mint and Ubuntu, which are addressed to users who want interfaces that they would immediately be comfortable with. To overcome these differences, the Linux Mint team initially set out to develop extensions for the GNOME Shell to replace the abandoned features. The results of this effort were the Mint GNOME Shell extensions, MGSE. Meanwhile, the Mint desktop environment had also been forked from GNOME 2. Linux Mint 12, released in November 2011, subsequently included both, thereby giving users a choice of either GNOME 3 with MGSE or a traditional GNOME 2 desktop. However, even with MGSE, GNOME 3 was still largely missing the comforts of GNOME 2 and was not well received by the user community. At the time, some of the missing features could not be replaced by extensions, and it seemed that extensions would not be viable in the long run. Moreover, the GNOME developers were not amenable to the needs of the Mint developers. To give the Mint developers finer control over the development process, GNOME Shell was forked as Project Cinnamon in January 2012. Gradually, various core applications were adapted by the Mint developers. Beginning with version 1.2, released in January 2012, Cinnamon's window manager is Muffin, which was originally a fork of GNOME 3's Mutter. Similarly, since September 2012, version 1.6 onwards, Cinnamon includes the Nemo file manager, which was forked from Nautilus. Cinnamon Control Center, included since May 2013, version 1.8 onwards, combines the functionality of GNOME Control Center with that of Cinnamon settings, and made it possible to manage and update applets, extensions, desklets and themes through the Control Center. GNOME Screensaver was also forked and is now called Cinnamon Screensaver. Since October 2013, version 2.0 onwards, Cinnamon is no longer a front-end on top of the GNOME desktop like Unity or GNOME Shell, but a discrete desktop environment in its own right. Although Cinnamon is still built on GNOME technologies and uses GTK, it no longer requires GNOME itself to be installed. Further improvements in later versions include a desktop grid, wildcard support in file searches, multi-process settings daemon, desktop actions in the panel launcher, separate processes for desktop handling and file manager in Nemo. An additional desktop panel layout option that offers a more modern-looking theme and grouped windows. Improved naming for duplicate applications in the menu, that is Flatpak versus stub packages, pin files in Nemo, and a focus on performance improvements. The last desktop environment we will look at in this video is called Lumina. Lumina Desktop Environment, or simply Lumina, is a plugin-based desktop environment for Unix and Unix-like operating systems. It is designed specifically as a system interface for true OS and systems derived from Berkeley Software Distribution, BSD, in general, but has been ported to various Linux distributions. Created in 2012 by Ken Moore, Lumina was initially a set of extensions to Flexbox, a stacking window manager for the X Window system. By late 2013, Moore had developed a graphical overlay for Flexbox based on Qt4 and had created a utility for launching applications and opening files. The codebase was integrated into the PCBSD source repository by early 2014, and a port was added to the free BSD ports collection in April 2014. The source code has since been moved to a separate GitHub repository under the PCBSD umbrella and converted to use Qt5. Development also focused on replacing the Flexbox core with a Qt-based window manager integrated with the Lumina desktop. The project avoids use of Linux-based tools or frameworks, such as Dbus, Polkit, and Systemd. The desktop and application menus are dynamically configured upon first being launched, as the desktop environment finds installed applications automatically to add to the menu and as a desktop icon. The default panel includes a Start menu, Task Manager, and System Tray, and its location can be customized. Menus may be accessed via the Start menu or by right-clicking the mouse on the desktop background. Some features are specific to true OS, including hardware control of screen brightness, monitor backlight, preventing shutdown of an updating system, and integration with various true OS utilities. Utilities include Insight, a file manager; File Information, which reports a file's format and other details; and Lumina Open, a graphical utility to launch applications based on the selected file or folder. Version 1.4 included several new utilities. The PDF reader Lumina PDF is based on the popular library. The Lumina theme engine replaced an earlier theme system. It enables the user to configure the desktop appearance and functionality, and ensures all Qt5 applications present a unified appearance. Okay, that's it for this video, folks. Please remember to hit that subscribe button, and do be sure to give my videos a thumbs up. It would be much appreciated, and do enable notifications, so that you won't miss out on any future videos. Okay, bye for now.